I took the job at the Harbrook for the same reason anyone takes a job they shouldn't. I needed the money, and I'd run out of reasons to be careful. 6 months before I found the listing, my wife left. Not dramatically, no screaming, no thrown dishes, no affair discovered at the worst possible moment. She just sat across from me one Tuesday evening and said she didn't recognize the person she'd married, and I couldn't argue with her because I wasn't sure I recognized him either. The divorce was clean, the debt it left behind was not. 2 credit cards, the remainder of a car loan, and 3 months of back rent on an apartment I could no longer afford alone. I moved in with my brother in Salem for a while, picked up shifts at a warehouse, and spent my evenings scrolling through job boards with the desperation of a man watching the waterline rise. The listing appeared on a hospitality industry board I had no business being on. I'd worked the front desk at a Holiday Inn for 2 years in my 20s, which I suppose technically qualified me, the way a single semester of French technically qualifies you to live in Paris. Night auditor, the Harbrook Hotel, Crace Point, Oregon. The salary was listed in a range that I read 3 times because I assumed I was misreading it. Room and board included. Immediate start. The description was sparse. Historic coastal property. Small staff. Must be comfortable working alone overnight. Apply with resume and availability. I sent my resume within the hour. I received a call the next morning from a man named Elling who asked me 4 questions. Could I operate basic auditing software? Was I comfortable with solitude? Did I have reliable transportation to the coast? And could I start the following Monday? I said yes to everything. He said he'd email directions because GPS was unreliable on the last stretch of road. He wasn't wrong about that. The drive from Salem took 4 hours, the last 40 minutes of which wound along a coastal highway that narrowed into something barely wider than a logging road. Crace Point wasn't a town in any meaningful sense. A gas station, a bait shop, a post office that shared a building with a laundromat, and maybe 30 houses scattered across the headlands like seeds that had blown off a truck. The Harbrook sat at the end of a gravel drive that branched off the main road and climbed for half a mile before cresting a bluff that overlooked the Pacific. I'll be honest, I wasn't prepared for the building. I'd expected something shabby, the kind of place that advertises its age as character to excuse the stains. The Harbrook was beautiful. 3 stories of gray stone and dark timber, built in a style that suggested someone in the 1920s had looked at a New England Grand Hotel and a Scottish hunting lodge and decided they wanted both. The grounds were immaculate. Hedges trimmed sharp, gravel raked clean, a fountain in the front circle that actually worked. The ocean spread out behind it like a backdrop painted by someone who understood how light worked in the late afternoon, all copper and steel blue. Elling met me in the lobby. He was the day manager, mid-50s, neat, the kind of man who wore a tie because he wanted to, not because anyone required it. He shook my hand with the brisk efficiency of someone checking an item off a list and walked me through the property. The lobby was all dark wood and amber lighting, with a stone fireplace large enough to stand in. There was a small bar off the main hall, a dining room that seated maybe 40, a ballroom in the east wing that he mentioned was rarely used for events these days, and 3 floors of guest rooms, 26 in total. The staff wing was on the ground floor behind the kitchen, a corridor of small but clean rooms with their own bathroom and a window that faced the tree line. We averaged perhaps 12 to 15 guests on any given night during peak season, Elling told me as we walked. Fewer in winter, the hotel has a reputation among a certain clientele who value the remoteness. We don't advertise aggressively, word of mouth mostly. I asked who else worked nights. He paused at that. A brief pause, the kind you wouldn't notice if you weren't looking for it. Dana Whalen handles the evening overlap and early morning transition. She'll train you. Beyond that, the night shift is a solo operation. Housekeeping is day only. Kitchen closes at 10. You'll have the building largely to yourself from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. He showed me to my room, told me to settle in, and said Dana would find me at 9 that evening for orientation. Then he left, and I was alone in a beautiful hotel at the edge of the continent, with a suitcase and the persistent feeling that I'd gotten away with something. Dana found me in the lobby at 9 sharp. She came through the staff door behind the front desk, a woman I would have guessed was 40, maybe 42, with dark hair pulled back and the kind of face that suggested she'd been attractive, in a way she'd never had much use for. She wore the same dark blazer and white shirt that Elling had, but on her, it looked less like a uniform and more like armor she'd worn so long it had molded to her body. "Marcus Hale?" she said, and I confirmed it, and she nodded once and said, "Good, let's start." Dana was efficient in a way that went past professional into something I didn't have a word for yet. She walked me through the auditing system, a surprisingly modern setup for such an old hotel, cloud-based, intuitive. She showed me how to run the nightly reports, reconcile the day's charges, post room fees, balance the books. She showed me the breakfast prep checklist, coffee urns loaded by 5 a.m., continental items set out by 6, the kitchen's morning delivery received at the service entrance at 6:30. She showed me the security panel, the keycard system, the emergency contacts binder. All of it was normal. All of it made sense. She was a good trainer, patient without being condescending, thorough without being tedious. Then she pulled a laminated card from beneath the front desk and set it between us. "These are the additional operating procedures for the night shift," she said. "They're specific to this property, and they're non-negotiable." I picked up the card. It was typed in a clean, no-nonsense font. 7 items. 1. Between 2 a.m. and 3:30 a.m., if the lobby telephone rings, answer it. Do not speak until the caller speaks first. 2. If a guest requests check-in after midnight and asks for the top floor, accommodate them immediately, regardless of what the booking system shows. 3. Do not enter room 6 on the 3rd floor under any circumstances. If a call comes from that room's extension, note the time in the logbook and move on. 4. The service elevator operates independently between 1 o'clock a.m. and 4 a.m. Do not attempt to override it, and do not open the doors if it stops on your floor. 5. If you hear music from the East Wing ballroom, log the time and duration. Do not investigate. 6. Place fresh linens in the dumbwaiter for the 7th floor by 1:30 a.m. each night. Do not deliver them in person. 7. If a guest approaches the front desk and you cannot recall checking them in, treat them as a current guest. Do not ask when they arrived. I read them twice. I looked at Dana. "The hotel only has 3 floors, I said. "That's correct," she said. "Number 6 references a 7th floor." "It does." I waited for her to elaborate. She didn't. She watched me with an expression I would later learn to recognize as patience, not the performative kind, but the deep, structural patience of someone who has had this conversation many times and knows that no explanation she offers will land properly until I've spent a few nights behind the desk. "Is this a hazing thing?" I asked. "No? A liability thing? Something for insurance?" "It's an operating procedure," Dana said. "The phone system has quirks after 2 a.m., old wiring, interference from the coastal weather. The first rule accounts for that. Room 6 has a persistent plumbing issue that makes it uninhabitable. We keep it off the books, but the extension still rings occasionally. The service elevator is on an automated maintenance cycle overnight. The ballroom has acoustic properties that pick up ocean resonance. The linens are for a storage area accessed via the dumbwaiter. Old system, still in use." She said all of this with the practiced ease of someone reciting a script she believed just enough to deliver convincingly. "And the 7th floor?" "The dumbwaiter services an attic area that was used for staff housing when the hotel had a larger complement. The linens go there for storage rotation. 7th floor is a misnomer. It's a holdover from the original building plans." I nodded. None of it was satisfying. All of it was technically possible. "Follow the procedures, do the job, and you'll settle in quickly," Dana said. "I'm here every night from 9 to midnight for the overlap, and again from 5 to 7 for the morning transition. You'll have the 4 hours in between on your own. It's quiet. It's routine. Most nights, nothing happens at all." She was right about that, at first. The first 5 nights blurred together in the way that overnight shifts do, each one a long plateau of silence with occasional punctuation. I ran reports, balanced ledgers, answered emails. The hotel was quiet in a way that had texture to it, not the dead silence of an empty building, but the living quiet of a structure that was breathing around you, settling its weight, adjusting to the temperature. I could hear the ocean if I stood near the west windows, a constant low sound that wasn't quite rhythmic enough to be soothing. On my second night, the service elevator activated at 1:15 a.m. I was at the desk doing the audit when I heard it. The mechanical hum of the motor, the rattle of the cables in the shaft. I walked to the elevator alcove off the main lobby and watched the indicator above the doors. It climbed from 1 to 2, paused, then continued to 3. It stopped there for nearly a minute. Then it descended back to 1. The doors didn't open. The hum died. I went back to the desk. On my third night, the lobby phone rang at 2:22 a.m. I picked it up and held it to my ear, remembering the rule. Silence, not dead air. I could hear something on the line, a faint ambient texture, like a room with high ceilings and hard floors. Then a voice, calm, male, slightly formal in a way I associated with older people who'd grown up with telephone etiquette. "Good evening. I'd like to request additional towels for room 408. I checked the system. Room 408 was listed as unoccupied. I hesitated, then processed the request per the procedure for the dumbwaiter, loaded 2 fresh towels into the small service compartment behind the front desk, and sent it up. The dumbwaiter hummed, rose, stopped. A minute later, it descended empty. I noted the request in the logbook and moved on. The next morning, I checked with Gloria, the day shift housekeeper, a woman in her 60s who had worked at the Harbrook for 11 years and who treated the building with the possessive familiarity of a grandmother. I asked her about room 408. 408's been empty since last Thursday, she said, not looking up from her cart. The Petersons checked out. Someone called from there last night asking for towels. Gloria stopped folding. She looked at me, not with fear, but with a very specific kind of discomfort, the expression of someone who's been handed information they've trained themselves not to receive. "The phone system does things at night," she said. "Old wiring." She went back to folding. On my fourth night, a man walked through the front door at 12:47 a.m. He was tall, well-dressed in a dark coat and gray scarf, carrying a single leather valise. He was polite, smiled, set the valise on the counter, and said he'd like a room. The top floor, if available. I followed the procedure. I didn't check the system. The rule said to accommodate immediately, regardless. I programmed a key card for room 312, the corner suite on 3, which was the highest floor. He signed the register in a hand I couldn't read well. The letters were technically Latin alphabet but arranged in combinations that my eye kept sliding off of, the way you can't focus on a word you've stared at too long. He took the key with a nod and walked toward the main staircase, and I noticed 2 things. His valise seemed to shift weight as he carried it, listing from one side to the other like something inside was redistributing itself, and his footsteps on the lobby tile made no sound at all. Not muffled, absent, like the floor wasn't registering the contact. I entered the check-in in the system. The next morning, I pulled up room 312. The system showed it as unoccupied. No record of a check-in, no keycard logged. I went to the 3rd floor and stood outside 312. The door was closed. I pressed my ear against it and heard nothing. I used my master key and opened it. The room was immaculate. Bed made, towels folded, complimentary water bottles untouched. No luggage, no sign of occupancy. The air had the flat, neutral smell of a room that hadn't been breathed in. But the guest register at the front desk still had his entry. I could see the ink, the pressure of the pen on the page. The name was unreadable in the daylight, too. That was the end of my first week. I told myself that old hotels had quirks, that coastal isolation played tricks on routine and perception, that the sensory deprivation of overnight work was well documented to produce mild hallucinations and pattern-matching errors. I almost believed it. The second week is when I started looking. It wasn't a single moment that tipped me over. It was accumulation, the way a crack in a windshield spreads. Small things that didn't resolve. The elevator activating every night at slightly different times, but always between 1 and 4. The phone ringing at 2 a.m., always answered per protocol, always a calm voice requesting something mundane, towels, a pillow, ice. For rooms the system listed as vacant. Guests I checked in after midnight who evaporated from the records by morning. The ballroom music, which I heard on my 6th and 8th nights, distant, beautiful, a string arrangement that almost resolved into something I recognized but never quite did. like a word on the tip of your tongue that dissolves when you reach for it. On Tuesday of my second week, I went into the back office during a quiet stretch around 3 a.m. and found the night shift logbook. Not the current one, the archive. Elling kept meticulous records. There were logbooks going back decades in a filing cabinet behind the reception printer. I pulled one at random, 1994. The handwriting was neat, consistent, feminine. Every entry followed the same format. Time, event, action taken. 2:14 a.m. Phone, room 511. Requested extra blanket, sent via dumbwaiter. 1:37 a.m. Service elevator active. Floors 131. Duration, 4 minutes. 12:52 a.m. Late check-in. Male guest, top floor requested. Accommodated in 310. I pulled the 1998 logbook. Same handwriting. Same format. I pulled 2003. Same. I pulled 2011, 2017. The same handwriting. Unchanged. For at least 17 years. I knew whose handwriting it was. I'd been reading Dana's notes in the current logbook for 9 days. The next thing I did was find the employee records. They were in a locked drawer that my master key opened. Elling's oversight, or maybe not. Dana Whalen's file was thin. Hire date, October 14th, 1987. Position, night shift manager. No performance reviews, no pay adjustments. No emergency contact updates. Just the original hire sheet, a photocopy of a driver's license. The picture showed a young woman, early 20s, with the same dark hair and direct gaze I saw every evening at 9. And a single note clipped to the inside of the folder in handwriting I didn't recognize. Arrangement confirmed. Standard terms. I did the math. If Dana was hired in 1987 at 22 or 23, she would be 58 or 59 now. The woman I worked with every night looked 40 at the outside. I'd assumed she was my age. I tried asking Gloria about it the next morning. I was careful. I didn't mention Dana's file or the logbooks. I just asked, casually, how long Dana had been at the hotel. Gloria set down the stack of pillowcases she was carrying and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her before. It wasn't fear. It was boundary enforcement. I work days, she said quietly. I've always worked days. I don't go into the East Wing after dark, and I don't ask questions about the night shift, and if you're smart, you'll do your job and save your curiosity for things that want to be understood. She picked up the pillowcases and walked away, and that was the last time she spoke to me about anything that wasn't directly related to housekeeping logistics. That night, I tried a different approach. I photographed everything. The guest register entries, the logbook, the lobby at various hours. I photographed the elevator indicator when it moved on its own. I photographed the hallway outside room 408 after a phone request came in at 2:08 a.m. When I reviewed the photos later in my room, the logbook entries were legible. The lobby shots were normal, but the photos I'd taken of the third-floor hallway showed something wrong. Not dramatically, nothing I could point to and say, there, that's impossible. The hallway was there, the doors were there, the carpet and sconces and numbered plaques were all in their right places, but the proportions were off. The hallway in the photos was longer than the hallway I'd walked. There were more doors than the floor plan accounted for, and at the far end, where the corridor should have terminated at a window overlooking the rear grounds, there was instead another corridor, turning left, continuing into a part of the building that didn't exist. I went back to the third floor in daylight, walked the corridor, counted doors, reached the window at the end, looked out at the grounds, the trees, the gray ocean. The hallway was exactly as long as it should have been. The correct number of doors. No additional corridor. The photos on my phone still showed the extended version. I stood there for a long time, holding the phone up, comparing what the camera had recorded with what my eyes were seeing. And I understood that one of them was lying, but I didn't know which one, and I wasn't sure it mattered. On Thursday of my second week, my 11th night, the ballroom music started at 1:33 a.m. I logged it. I sat at the desk. I listened to it filter through the corridors, that almost familiar string arrangement that bent in places where Western music doesn't bend. Intervals that sounded like someone had translated a melody from a language with more vowels than ours. I sat for 20 minutes. Then I stood up, walked out from behind the desk, and went to the East Wing. I know what the rules said. I understood, in the abstract, that there were reasons for the rules. But I am not a person who is built to sit in a room and not open the door that everyone tells me to leave closed. That's not courage. It's a deficiency, a missing piece of whatever mechanism allows normal people to accept mystery without needing to unwrap it. My ex-wife called it my worst quality. She was probably right. The East Wing corridor was dim, the hotel kept minimal lighting overnight to save power, and the sconces here cast small circles of amber that didn't quite connect, leaving pools of shadow between them. The ballroom doors were at the end of the corridor, tall and paneled, original to the building. Warm light leaked from beneath them, a flickering gold that suggested candles or gas lamps, not electric bulbs. The music was clear now, close, present, real. I could feel it in my sternum, a low vibration that wasn't quite sound. I opened the right-hand door 6 inches and looked through. The ballroom was occupied. 30, maybe 35 figures, arranged in the loose geometry of a cocktail reception. They wore formal attire, dark suits, gowns in colors I wanted to call burgundy and charcoal and midnight blue, but that weren't quite any of those things. Shades that existed in the gaps between colors I had names for. They held glasses. They conversed. From a distance, from a glance, they were a gathering of wealthy, elegant people enjoying a private event in a beautiful room. But I wasn't glancing. I was looking. Their movements were wrong. Not inhuman, in the cinematic sense. No jerking, no uncanny valley stiffness. They moved fluidly, gracefully, but at angles that didn't correspond to their bodies. A man turned his head to the left, but his shoulders rotated 15 degrees to the right. A woman gestured with her hand, and her wrist articulated in a direction that would have required an additional joint. 2 men stood facing each other in conversation, and their mouths moved, but the sounds I heard didn't synchronize. The words arrived a half-beat before or after the lips that shaped them, as if the audio and video were running on slightly different timelines. The mirrors along the ballroom walls reflected the room, but not correctly. In the mirrors, the figures stood in different positions than they occupied in physical space. A woman near the bar was, in her reflection, standing by the window. A man seated at a table was, in the mirror, standing behind a different man, leaning close, whispering. The reflections moved independently, conducting a parallel version of the same event with different blocking. The music came from instruments arranged on the small stage at the far end, a string quartet's worth of instruments, playing themselves. The bows drew across the strings with precision and feeling, held by nothing. The cello leaned into its notes with the slight sway of a musician lost in the piece, but there was no musician, just the instrument, alive with motion and sound, performing for an audience that wasn't entirely here. And the room itself, the ballroom at the Harbrook, was a fine room. High ceilings, parquet floors, tall windows that faced the eastern grounds. But the room I was looking into was larger than the ballroom I'd been shown during my tour. The ceiling was higher. The windows showed a sky that was wrong. Not the overcast Oregon night I'd walked through to get here, but a clear, deep darkness populated with stars and configurations I didn't recognize. Too many of them, too bright, arranged in patterns that suggested constellations designed by a different set of eyes for a different set of myths. A woman near the center of the room turned and looked directly at me. She was beautiful, the way a deep ocean trench is beautiful, the beauty of something so far outside your frame of reference that your brain defaults to awe because it doesn't have a more appropriate response. She had dark hair, dark eyes, and a face that was perfectly symmetrical in a way human faces never quite achieve. She smiled. I felt it in my chest. Not warmth, not cold, but pressure, as if the air in my lungs had momentarily increased in density. She raised her glass toward me. "The new concierge," she said. Her voice carried across the room without effort, clear as a bell struck in an empty cathedral. Others turned, faces oriented toward the door, not alarmed, not hostile, interested, the way you're interested when the waiter arrives with a dish you've been anticipating. "Welcome to the Harbrook," someone said. A man, tall, standing near the windows with his back to the impossible sky. "We've been hoping the new hire would be curious." I closed the door. I walked back to the front desk. I sat down. My hands were shaking, and I pressed them flat against the counter until the tremor subsided. The music continued for another 47 minutes. I know because I logged it, because logging it was the only thing I could do that felt like an action rather than a reaction. Nothing came for me. No one emerged from the ballroom. No footsteps in the East Wing corridor. The music ended at 2:20 a.m., and the silence that followed was total, and the rest of the night was uneventful. And that normalcy was more disturbing than anything that had come before it, because it suggested that what I'd seen wasn't an intrusion or an emergency. It was just Thursday. Dana arrived at 5 a.m. for the morning transition. I watched her come through the staff door with her blazer buttoned and her hair pulled back, and I thought about a hire date in 1987 and a face that hadn't changed in the logbook photos across 3 decades. "I went to the ballroom," I said. She stopped, set her bag behind the desk, looked at me. The expression on her face wasn't anger or surprise, it was resignation, the specific resignation of someone who knew this conversation was inevitable and had been waiting for it to arrive on its own schedule. "Sit down," she said. We sat in the 2 chairs behind the reception counter, angled toward each other. The lobby was quiet. Dawn was starting to gray the windows. Dana folded her hands in her lap and spoke the way you'd explain a medical diagnosis, clearly, without embellishment, with the understanding that the information itself was going to do the damage regardless of delivery. "The hotel was built in 1923 by a man named Elias Harbrook," she said. "He understood what this location was. The headlands, the specific point where the bluff meets the ocean. It's a junction, not between worlds, not between dimensions. I don't know the real terminology, and I've never met anyone who does. But certain things travel routes that intersect here. They always have. The Chinook people who lived on this coast had a name for the headlands that translates roughly to the place where the road touches. They didn't build here. They didn't camp here. They understood what passed through. She told me that before the hotel, the things that traveled through the junction just passed, like weather, like tides, but their passage had effects, not catastrophic, not cinematic, but persistent. People in the area experienced confusion, disorientation, time that didn't behave correctly. Livestock behaved strangely. Compasses spun. The Chinook managed it through avoidance and ritual. The settlers who came later didn't manage it at all, and the early history of Crace Point is a catalog of small, strange tragedies that no one ever connected because no one was looking for a pattern. Harbrook was looking. He'd made his money in timber and spent his middle age studying things that polite society didn't discuss. He built the hotel as a way station, a place for the travelers to stop, rest, be comfortable, be served. In exchange, they constrained their passage. They used the junction deliberately, on schedule, with protocols. They checked in, and they checked out, and they moved on, and the surrounding area stabilized. Crace Point, she told me, has one of the lowest rates of unexplained incidents on the entire Oregon coast. No disappearances, no anomalous weather, no clusters of madness or violence. That wasn't luck. That was the arrangement. The rules are service protocols, Dana said, not protection. Hospitality, don't speak first on the phone because they consider it presumptuous. They'll address you when they're ready, and you wait. Don't enter room 6 because it's occupied permanently by the liaison, the one who oversees the arrangement on their side. It doesn't leave, and it doesn't like being disturbed. The elevator services floors that aren't on our floor plan. They exist when they're needed, and don't when they're not. The music means a function, a gathering. They're social, in their way. The linens go to the upper areas because they prefer human-made textiles. I've never gotten a satisfying answer as to why. And Rule 7? I asked. The guests I can't remember checking in? Dana's expression shifted, something almost like sympathy, but harder. Some of them don't use the front door. They arrive through the junction directly into the building. They're still guests. They still expect service. You won't remember checking them in because you didn't. Treat them as current guests because that's what they are. And asking questions about their arrival implies you're questioning their right to be here. They don't respond well to that. I asked the question I'd been circling since I found her employee file. How old are you, Dana? She didn't flinch. I was 23 when I started. October 1987. You look 40. I know. It's a side effect. Proximity to them, to the junction, it does something to the rate. Aging, cellular decay, the whole biological clock. It slows, not stops. Slows. I've been here 39 years and I've aged maybe 17. Mr. Elling is older than he looks too, though the effect is weaker for day staff. It's strongest for those of us who interact with them directly. Is that why the pay is so high? That's part of it. The other part is that people who take this job tend to need a reason not to leave, and money is a reliable reason, at least until they find a better one. She told me I could ask more questions and she would answer what she could, and I believed her, because Dana had not lied to me once in the 2 weeks I'd known her. She'd withheld, she'd deflected, she'd given me answers that were technically true and structurally useless, but she hadn't lied. That mattered. In a situation where everything else was unmoored, the fact that my colleague was honest mattered. I asked the question that mattered most. What happens if I leave? Dana looked at me for a long time. The dawn light was strengthening, turning the lobby windows from gray to pale gold. Somewhere in the building, the first sounds of the day shift were beginning. A door closing, water running, Gloria's cart squeaking down a distant hallway. "You can leave whenever you want," she said. "No one will stop you. There's no contract, no binding, no supernatural lock on the doors. You get in your car and you drive south, and you go back to whatever life you had before, and nothing prevents that. But you've been here 3 weeks. You've interacted with them, you've served them, you answered their calls, fulfilled their requests, accommodated their check-ins. They know your face, and once they know your face, Marcus, you can recognize theirs." She let that sit. I let it sit. "They're not just here," she continued. "They travel. That's what they do. That's what the junction is. A stop on a route. They pass through everywhere. Every city, every town, every stretch of highway, an empty parking lot, and quiet neighborhood. Most people can't perceive them. They're background noise, a feeling of unease in a stairwell, the sense that a room was just occupied, a shadow in peripheral vision that's gone when you turn. You've felt it. Everyone has. It's them, passing through. And it doesn't matter, because if you can't see them, they have no reason to see you. But I can see them now. You've been calibrated. That's the word Harbrook used in his journals. Proximity and interaction calibrate the human perceptual system to register them. It's not immediate. It builds over time. 2 or 3 weeks of night shifts is usually enough. You can see them because you've been serving them, and the service requires recognition, and recognition is a two-way door. So they can see me. They already could. You were behind the desk. You were staff. Inside the hotel. Inside the arrangement. That's fine. The arrangement includes protocols for human entity interaction, politeness, boundaries, mutual obligation. In here, you're the concierge. Out there, she gestured vaguely toward the windows, toward the ocean, toward everything beyond the gravel drive. Out there, there's no arrangement. You're just a person who can see them, and they're just things that know they're being seen, and there are no protocols governing what happens next. I asked about people who had left. She told me about a man named Keith who'd worked the night shift for 6 months in 2004 and left for Bend. He lasted 4 months before he came back, and he'd lost weight and his hands shook, and he wouldn't talk about what he'd experienced. He was still at the hotel, she said, worked the maintenance crew now, days only, stayed in the staff wing, hadn't left the property in over 20 years. She told me about a woman named Asha who'd left in 2015 and lasted a week. She came back on a Tuesday morning and asked for her uniform back and never discussed it. She told me about a man named Gregory who'd left in 1996 and never came back. She said this without elaboration. I asked what happened to him. "I don't know," she said. "No one does. He stopped answering his phone after 2 weeks, and his apartment in Portland was found empty with the lights on and the front door open and nothing missing. The police filed a missing person report that went nowhere. I have my assumptions about what happened, but they're just assumptions." She didn't share them. She didn't need to. I went to my room. I lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about everything she'd told me with the cold, mechanical precision of a man running numbers on a problem he doesn't want to solve. Then I packed my suitcase. I didn't tell Dana. I didn't tell Elling. I left my key card on the reception desk with a note that said, "Thank you for the opportunity." And I carried my suitcase to my car, and I drove down the gravel drive and turned south on the coast highway, and I watched the Harbrook shrink in my rearview mirror until the road curved and the trees took it. I drove for 3 hours. The coast was beautiful in the late morning light, the kind of beauty that exists specifically to remind you that the world is large and your problems are local. I played the radio. I stopped for gas in a town called Gold Beach and bought a sandwich and ate it in the car and felt, for the first time in 3 weeks, like a normal person doing a normal thing. I reached Brookings by early afternoon and checked into a motel, a standard 2-story job off the highway, the kind of place that smells like industrial cleaner and cable TV. I showered, watched the news, and fell asleep at 6 p.m. with the lights on. I woke at 2:14 a.m. I didn't wake gradually, the way you do when a sound half reaches you through the layers of sleep. I went from unconscious to fully alert in a single transition, like a switch being thrown. I was lying on my back, staring at the ceiling, and I knew, with the bone-deep certainty of an instinct I hadn't possessed 3 weeks ago, that I needed to look out the window. The motel parking lot was half empty, lit by a single sodium lamp that turned everything the color of old teeth. My car was where I'd left it. 3 other vehicles were scattered across the lot, and standing next to the far car, motionless, was a figure. A man, tall, dark coat. He stood with his hands at his sides, facing my window. Not doing anything, not approaching, not retreating, not moving at all. Just standing in the orange light with a stillness that no living body maintains. A stillness that belongs to objects, to architecture, to things that don't need to breathe. I couldn't see his face clearly. I didn't need to. I recognized the way the weight sat on him, the almost right distribution, the slight wrongness in how gravity interacted with his frame, as if his body was a translation from a language with different rules about where mass should gather. I'd checked him in 9 days ago. Room 312, top floor. The leather valise that shifted weight on its own. I closed the curtain. I sat on the edge of the bed. My heart was running fast, but my mind was very still, very clear. And the clarity was worse than panic, because panic implies uncertainty, and I had none. I sat there until dawn turned the curtain edges gray, and when I opened them again, the figure was gone. I left Brookings. I drove south, into California, as if distance were a variable in an equation that would solve this. I stopped in Crescent City for gas and went inside the station to pay. A woman was standing at the cooler, examining bottles of water. She was young, dark-haired, pretty, normal. Except that when I glanced at the cooler's glass door, her reflection was doing something her body was not. Her physical face was turned toward the water. Her reflected face was turned toward me, watching me with an expression of calm assessment, the way you watch an insect that has landed on your sleeve, not with malice, but with the detached curiosity of a being deciding whether to engage. I left without buying anything. I drove. I stopped in Eureka, checked into another motel, lasted 1 night. In the morning, I walked to a diner for breakfast and saw a man sitting at a booth by the window. He was eating pancakes. His fork rose and fell with mechanical regularity, delivering bites to his mouth, and he chewed and he swallowed, and the stack of pancakes on his plate never diminished. The same 3 pancakes, the same syrup pattern, an infinite loop of consumption that produced nothing. No one else in the diner seemed to notice. I stopped eating. I went back to the motel. I sat on the bed and looked at my hands and tried to convince myself that I was hallucinating, that the isolation and sleep disruption of 3 weeks on the night shift had damaged my baseline perception, that what I was seeing was the artifact of an exhausted mind imposing patterns on randomness. I almost managed it. Then I walked to the motel's ice machine at the end of the corridor and saw a child standing at the far end of the hallway. The child was maybe 8. Boy or girl, I couldn't tell. The features had the androgynous softness of youth. The child stood perfectly still at the corridor's end, framed by the exit sign's red glow, and looked at me. The child did not blink. I stood at the ice machine for 1 minute, then 2, then 3, and the child did not blink, and the ice machine hummed and clattered beside me, and the child's eyes never moved from mine. Then the child smiled, and it was the same smile the woman in the ballroom had given me. beautiful and pressurized, a smile that existed in my chest before it registered in my eyes. I went back to my room and locked the door and sat in the dark. They weren't following me. That was the thing I couldn't stop understanding, the thing that made it worse than pursuit. Dana had said it. They traveled everywhere. They were always here, in the gas stations, in the diners, in the motel corridors and parking lots, and quiet streets of every town I'd ever walked through. They passed through like weather, like current, like a frequency just above or below the range of human hearing. I'd spent my entire life surrounded by them without knowing it, and the only thing that had changed was that now I could see them, and now they could see me seeing them. On my third night away from the Harbrook, I was sitting in a diner in Arcata at 11 p.m., trying to eat a plate of eggs I had no appetite for, when a man slid into the booth across from me. He was wearing a gray suit, no tie, briefcase on the seat beside him. He looked like a traveling salesman or a regional manager, the kind of person you see in every diner, in every small town and forget immediately. His face was handsome in a generic way, features that your memory would struggle to hold, the visual equivalent of Muzak. But his eyes were wrong, not the color, the depth. Looking into them was like looking down a hallway that extended behind the iris, a corridor that went back and back and back into a distance that had no relationship to the size of a human skull. "You're the new one from the Harbrook," he said. His voice was pleasant, conversational. I didn't say anything. "You should go back," he said. He picked up the menu and looked at it with every appearance of genuine interest. "The arrangement makes things civil. We appreciate the Harbrook. It's a good system. Elias understood what we needed, and the staff have always been professional. Dana, in particular, very competent, very reliable. And out here?" I said. He set the menu down. "Out here, we're under no obligation." He said it the way you'd state a fact about the weather. No menace, no threat, just the clean presentation of a condition. "You can see us now. That's not something we did to you. It's a consequence of the work. You were calibrated by the service, and calibration doesn't reverse. You'll see us for the rest of your life, in every place you go. That's just how it is. What happens if I stay out here?" He considered this. Have you ever been watched by something you couldn't see? Felt eyes on you in an empty room? Heard a sound you couldn't locate? That's us, passing through, unobserved. It's harmless because there's no connection, no mutual recognition. But you've established recognition. You've served us. You know our faces, and we know yours. He paused. We value our privacy, Marcus. The arrangement at the Harbrook includes discretion as a term. Inside the hotel, you see us, and we see you, and it's professional. Out here, it's something else. He wasn't threatening me. That was the part that sat in my stomach like a stone. He was advising me. The way a park ranger advises you not to approach the wildlife. Not because the ranger is hostile, but because the wildlife doesn't operate on your assumptions about how an interaction should go. We're not cruel, he said. We're not kind either. We are what we are, and what we are doesn't map onto your categories. Inside the Harbrook, the categories exist. The arrangement creates them. Concierge and guest, service and courtesy. It's a structure, and structure protects everyone. Without it, he shrugged. Without it, there's just proximity. And proximity without structure is unpredictable. He stood up, took his briefcase, left a $20 bill on the table. Crisp, perfect. A serial number I already knew wouldn't match any treasury record. The hotel is a good place to work, he said. The pay is excellent. The benefits are, by any human standard, remarkable, and you'll never have to wonder what's in the dark, because you'll always be able to see it, and it will always be, within those walls, polite. He walked out. The bell above the diner door chimed. The waitress came by and asked if my friend wanted to order, and I said he wasn't hungry, and she took the 20 and made change, and I left and sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time. I drove back. Not in panic, not in terror, in the calm, clear-eyed arithmetic of a man who has weighed two options and found one of them survivable and the other one not. I drove north through the night, back through the small towns and dark stretches of Highway 101, past the gas stations where things I could now identify browsed the aisles like shoppers, past the rest stops where figures stood at the edges of the light, with patience that didn't belong to anything with a heartbeat. I drove with my eyes on the road and my hands steady and the radio off, because the silence felt more honest. I reached Crace Point at dawn. The gravel drive wound up the bluff, and the Harbrook materialized out of the morning fog the way a ship materializes out of the ocean. Gradually, inevitably, as if it had been waiting just below the surface for me to arrive. The stone was gray in the early light. The fountain was running. The hedges were trimmed. It was, by every visible measure, a beautiful hotel at the edge of the world, and I pulled into the staff parking area and turned off the engine and sat there until my breathing was even. Dana was at the front desk when I walked in. She looked up from the logbook. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look sympathetic. She looked like a woman whose prediction had been confirmed and who took no pleasure in the confirmation. She reached beneath the counter and slid a fresh laminated rule card across the surface. "Welcome back," she said. "Your shift starts at 11. I picked up the card. Read the 7 rules I'd already memorized. They look different now. Not strange, not ominous, but functional, necessary. The way a pressure valve looks different once you understand what happens when the pressure has no valve. I went to my room, the same room, still clean, still waiting, as if the 3 days I'd been gone were a rounding error the hotel had chosen not to acknowledge. I unpacked my suitcase. I hung my clothes in the closet. I set my alarm for 10 p.m. and lay down on the bed and slept more soundly than I had since I'd arrived on the Oregon coast. Because the thing about certainty, even terrible certainty, is that it is a foundation, and a foundation is something you can rest on. I've been at the Harbrook for 7 months now. Dana and I work the shift together most nights. She handles the overlap and transitions. I handle the deep hours. We don't talk about the nature of the work anymore. We don't need to. We talk about books, about weather, about the small human things that keep you tethered when the context of your life has shifted beyond what any previous version of yourself would recognize. She's a good colleague. She's been doing this for nearly 40 years, and there is a steadiness in her that I've learned to lean on the way a climber leans on a rope. Not because the rope makes the height less real, but because it makes the height survivable. I follow the rules. I answer the phone after 2 a.m., and I wait for the voice, and I send towels and linens and pillows to rooms that don't exist on any floor plan I can access. I accommodate the late check-ins, the tall figures in dark coats, the women with symmetrical faces and eyes that hold more depth than geometry should allow, the quiet ones who arrive without luggage and leave without checking out, and whose names in the register dissolve into unreadable script by morning. I log the music when it plays. I keep the dumbwaiter stocked. I do not enter room 6. Occasionally, one of them speaks to me. The woman from the ballroom, the one who called me the new concierge, stops by the desk sometimes on her way to wherever she goes when the music ends. She's courteous. She asks about the weather, about the ocean, about small things that I suspect she already knows the answers to, but asks because the asking is part of the structure, part of the arrangement, and the arrangement requires the performance of mutual civility. I answer her, and she smiles, and the pressure in my chest is something I've learned to breathe around the way you learn, to breathe around a cracked rib, carefully, consciously, with the understanding that the injury is permanent and the management is ongoing. I am not a prisoner. I want to be clear about that. The doors are unlocked. My car is in the lot. The highway is right there. A 40-minute drive to a world where most people can't see what I see and never will. I could leave again. I could drive south and try to build a life among things that wear human shapes in gas stations and diners and motel hallways, things that know my face and are under no obligation. I don't leave. Not because I'm afraid, or not only because I'm afraid, because I understand, with the perfect, unforgiving clarity that 3 sleepless nights in the outside world burned into me, that the Harbrook is the only place on earth where what I've become makes sense. Night auditor, concierge, the human behind the desk who greets the things that travel through and ensures their stay is comfortable and asks no questions about where they've been or where they're going. It's a role, it's a function, and as long as I perform it, the arrangement holds, and the arrangement is a wall between me and a world where nothing is obligated to be civil. The lobby phone is ringing. It's 2:11 a.m. I pick up the receiver and hold it to my ear and wait. Silence. The ambient texture of a room I can't see, with ceilings I can't measure, in a place that doesn't correspond to any address. Then the voice comes. Calm, formal, patient. Good evening. I'd like to request a late checkout for room 412. Of course, I say. I'll make a note of it. Is there anything else I can help you with? A pause. Then, no. That will be all. Thank you, Marcus. They know my name. They all know my name. And I smile, not because I want to, but because the smile is a clause in a contract I signed the moment I answered the first phone call, and the contract is a wall, and on the other side of that wall is every dark parking lot and empty corridor and quiet diner booth in the world, full of things that are under no obligation to wear a human face when they look at you. My pleasure, I say. Enjoy your stay. And I mean it.